A desert planet with twin suns.
Why do I sense we've picked up another pathetic life form?
Use my knowledge. Much to learn, you still have.
Welcome back to Twin Sun Talks, folks. I'm your host, Jonah Liu. Thank you so much for listening. So today we got a couple things going on. The main topic of this episode is profiling Boba Fett, and the reasoning for that is going to be expressed later. But first off, I have a few things that I've watched recently that I'd like to review, so let's hop into I Have Spoken.
I have spoken.
Alrighty, so there are 4 things that I'm wanting to review today. The first of which, and this is something that I've been promising that I do for a while now, is Visions. So Visions, for those of you who don't know, is a Star Wars anime project that just got released a couple weeks ago. And it's non-canon, and I'm actually going to just be giving a very brief review, and it's going to be very not specific because this Friday I'm having my very first edition of The Ability to Speak Does Not Make You Intelligent, which is going to be with one of my roommates, John Grimes, and one of our friends, Hamza Al-Assadi. And essentially we're going to be going more in depth about each episode and our favorite parts, but I didn't want to devote an entire episode to that, so that's why we're doing it then. So yeah, stay tuned this Friday if you want to learn more about that. But I will say that I really enjoyed Visions overall. I thought that it was a great addition to the Star Wars mythos. Once again, it's not canon, so no need to get kind of tied up over whether or not some of this stuff ruins the franchise or not. I think that it was really well done for the most part. I think that I would recommend it to anybody, really. Maybe skip a few episodes here and there, but if you want to see my rankings for them, you can check out the Instagram at TwinSunTalks, or you can check out the website twinsuntalks.wixsite.com/twin-sun. They're up there as well. So yeah, if you're interested in that at all, I would highly recommend checking that out. The first episode's really amazing. So yeah, I would highly recommend diving into that. The next 2 things I have to talk about are books. I've read 2 of the Old Republic novels, and I've really enjoyed them. So the first one, which I enjoyed arguably less, although it was still pretty interesting, was called Star Wars The Old Republic Fatal Alliance. And so it's kind of hard for me to talk about this without giving too much away, but you have the perspective of several different individuals. One is a Jedi Padawan, one is a Sith apprentice, and one is kind of he's working for the Sith Empire, but he's a spy within the Republic. And so it's following those 3 characters and kind of seeing how they overlap. And this is set obviously during the times of the Old Republic with Satele Shan, and this is thousands of years before the Skywalker saga takes place. If you've played the game Knights of the Old Republic, it's loosely based on some of those characters. It's really, really awesome. That was a bit slow for me. So if you have interest in that time period, I'd recommend it, but it's not one of my favorite Star Wars books I've read. But the next one was called Star Wars The Old Republic Revan. And man, oh man, do I recommend reading this book. It's really, really incredible, but I will say it might be a little confusing if you don't know much about Revan as a character beforehand. Now, I do, and Revan is a character that I had heard a lot about, but I kind of thought was a little overrated. But after reading this book, I gotta say, I think that people's opinion of him are pretty spot on. He is a really, really interesting character. This is once again set thousands of years before the Skywalker saga, and it's following him after he has been redeemed. Now, a little bit about Revan. He was one of the most prominent and powerful Jedi within the Order. He kind of led a splinter group off to fight the Mandalorians after they were conquering a lot of territory in the Outer Rim. He eventually defeated the Mandalorians, went into the unknown regions, got turned to the dark side, became a Sith, became Darth Revan. Eventually, this is the SparkNotes version, the bare bones of his story. He eventually, after wreaking a lot of havoc, got redeemed by the Jedi and had his memories wiped, and this story focuses on what he did after his memories were wiped, and it's super, super cool. And I think that what I liked about this one more than the other one was that it was a single storyline. It was more contained to a set group of characters rather than like spread across several different points of view, which kind of got a little hard to follow. But I would highly, highly recommend that book. Maybe I can do another episode about Revan and other ancient Sith if you'd like before you dive into that. None of this is canon, neither Fatal Alliance or Revan, unfortunately, but they're still super, super interesting, and I would highly recommend Revan. I would highly recommend Revan, and if you're still interested in that time period, I would also recommend Fatal Alliance. It's a very interesting concept, but just wasn't quite as compelling to me. I've started the Darth Bane trilogy now, so I'm super excited to keep going with that. I'm enjoying it so far. But yeah, more on my reading later. The Bane trilogy is unfortunately also not canon, but c'est la vie. But yeah, I can definitely do an episode about ancient Sith like Revan and Nihilus and Malak and all of them down the line, so stay tuned for that. Lastly, I have to review, I have Lego Star Wars Terrifying Tales, which is the Halloween special, because spooky season is upon us. I mean, there's not too much to say about this, I just wanted to mention it, but it is a fun, lighthearted, not canon, obviously, story told in Lego Star Wars animation, which is always just a fun time. I mean, it's 100% for kids. It's not meant to be taken seriously, but there are some fun tidbits thrown in there. Essentially, like, it's almost like a what if episode for those of you Marvel fans out there. Like, a couple of them are like, what if Luke joined the Empire and stuff like that. Like, it's pretty cool. And there are a couple of interesting implications as far as, like, directions for future canon, like discussing ancient Sith and stuff like that go. So, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily recommend watching it, but it's a fun watch if you want something on in the background to kind of keep you entertained for 45 minutes. But yeah, that's all that I have for I Have Spoken. And so now, before I dive into ARC Trooper training, the reason that I'm profiling Boba Fett today is because Book of Boba Fett finally got a release date, and it's going to be on Wednesday, December 29th, which is super exciting. And it's pretty late, honestly. It's later than I was expecting it to be. But, man, I'm super, super excited. Because that means it's going to take us basically to March. It's going to be 2 months. So, I cannot express how excited I am for this, because mainly I'm super excited to see whether or not Mace Windu is still alive, and I have an inkling that he is. But that being said, there are going to be spoilers for both The Mandalorian and The Bad Batch in this next segment, so if you haven't watched either of those, obviously there are going to be spoilers for like Clone Wars and some of the movies, and pretty much all of my episodes from here on out. I've kind of given up on giving warnings for those at this point. So if you haven't watched Clone Wars and stuff, I would just assume that there are going to be some mild spoilers here and there in this podcast from here on out. But I can't really give a spoiler warning before each episode, so I'm just kind of covering the more recent media at this point. But there are going to be some of that. So just keep that in mind, and let's dive into ARC Trooper training.
Gentlemen, who wants to be an ARC Trooper? I do, sir!
Alrighty, so I'm going to go into sort of a history of Boba Fett first, and then I'm going to go into more of a list of factoids about him. So, Boba Fett in his prime was considered one of the most infamous and prestigious bounty hunters in the galaxy. Originally, Boba is one of two unaltered clones of the original donor of the Republic clone army named Jango Fett. And so his original codename was Alpha, later named Boba, and his counterpart was a female Jango Fett clone named Omega, as we meet in The Bad Batch. Boba was raised by Jango as a son, which when you think about it, it's kind of weird because he's technically like almost like a twin, but also his son. Kind of whack, but anyways. And he trained him as a bounty hunter. So at a very young age, Boba was already a very skilled combatant as well as a good sharpshooter, which is pretty wild. Jango was hired by the Separatist Alliance to kill Senator Padme Amidala, and then after a space battle with Obi-Wan Kenobi over Geonosis, Jango was slain by Mace Windu during the first battle of Geonosis. He was decapitated, and Boba watched this entire thing happen, which caused a newfound hatred for the Jedi within him. Because there's this really sad shot in Attack of the Clones of Boba like picking up his father's decapitated head. It's very dramatic. Like, it's absolutely disturbing. But afterwards, Boba joins a new bounty hunter team led by Aura Singh. Now, Aura Singh was kind of the pasty, tall, almost skeletal woman who's a bounty hunter. She had like the bald head with a single ponytail, and she used a really big sniper rifle. You see her briefly in The Phantom Menace, and then she's in Cad Bane's group of bounty hunters that takes over the Senate at the end of Season 1 of the Clone Wars. But this all happens at the end of Clone Wars Season 2. And Boba nearly kills Windu on an undercover infiltration to kill him. Like, that was the whole purpose of his infiltration, but he fails, and then Boba is ultimately captured by the Republic in the aftermath. And after he is released from Republic custody, he forms his own crew of bounty hunters called the Krait's Claw, named after the Krayt dragon, as found on Tatooine, which we see in Mandalorian Season 1. Or no, Season 2, Episode 1. He eventually begins to wear Mandalorian armor like his father. During the Imperial era, he begins to build a legendary reputation. He frequently works for Jabba the Hutt, as well as Darth Vader in the Empire on occasion. And Boba is actually the one who told Darth Vader the name of the man who destroyed the Death Star, which is Skywalker, which Vader took very, very poorly. Because one thing that people don't realize is that Vader and Anakin Skywalker are basically two completely different people. It's almost like multiple personality disorder. But Vader hated Anakin Skywalker. And so hearing that the Death Star was destroyed by Skywalker really struck a nerve with him. But Boba was the one that told him that. And then another big prominent job that we see him do is that he tracks the Millennium Falcon after the Battle of Hoth and captures and delivers Han Solo to Jabba the Hutt and Carbonite. And one thing that I don't have on this list, but that's super interesting, is that if you remember in A New Hope, Episode 4, Luke goes home to the Lars homestead, and he finds his aunt and uncle have been burned alive. And it's not, I don't know if it's officially canon or not, but Boba is allegedly the one that incinerated Owen and Beru Lars. And he was the one that was hunting for the missing Death Star plans that were in R2-D2 and C-3PO. It's not confirmed as canon, but that's a another Star Wars conspiracy. If you remember my episode about all of the different Star Wars theories and conspiracies that float around the internet. But I think that's kind of interesting. And then that kind of gives the line that Vader tells him in Empire Strikes Back a little more gravity, wherever he says, "No disintegrations this time." That could be like he had maybe told Boba not to kill the Larses if he found them, and then he did anyways, just because that was easier. But anyways, I digress. That's just a little tangent. But that's another thing, is that Boba is in that iconic lineup of bounty hunters, and then he ends up being the one in Empire Strikes Back that Vader hires, and then he ends up being the one to track the Millennium Falcon, yada, yada, Um, so, after Han Solo's rescue is thwarted, Boba falls into the Sarlacc pit when Luke Skywalker's execution goes awry. So the Sarlacc pit is that big tentacle armed thing that's in the Tatooine Dune Sea that Jabba tries to shove Luke, Han, and Chewie into to be digested for 1,000 years, and Boba accidentally falls into it when his jetpack is hit from behind and malfunctions and kind of throws him off the side of the sand skiff. In Mandalorian Season 2, it is revealed that Boba's armor was in the hands of Cobb Vanth, the Marshal of Mos Pelgo, I believe. And he obtained it from some Jawas. Boba himself had escaped the Sarlacc, though how is unknown, and enlisted the help of Fennec Shand. He and Fennec Shand assist Din Djarin in fighting the Empire and rescuing Grogu from their clutches. And then in a post-credit scene in the last episode of The Mandalorian Season 2, we see Boba return to the late Jabba's palace and kill Majordomo Bib Fortuna to take his place on the throne of the Star Wars underworld. And then that's the last that we saw him, and then we got a teaser for the Book of Boba Fett, which once again is coming out December 29th of this year, 2021, and I could not be more excited for it. So, obviously, I'll have more information about Boba after this is done, but I just wanted to give y'all a little bit of kind of a framework for who we're dealing with here. This is one of the most notorious bounty hunters who has ever lived in this galaxy, the son of one, or the clone of one. So speaking of this is just going to be the little factoids that I have about Boba. First of all, Jango is a Mandalorian by birth. I went over that in my comprehensive history of the Mandalorians back. This is at the very beginning. This is like episode 12. And Boba is technically one by birthright, technically, I think, just based on the fact that Din let him keep the armor. But he doesn't live by the Mandalorian Codex. And Bo-Katan doesn't consider him one, as seen in Mandalorian Season 2, so I'm not entirely sure. But his mentors included Django, Aurra Sing, and Cad Bane, and to an extent, Hondo Onaka, who was a friend of Django's, who kind of took him under his wing a little bit and helped him kind of cooperate with the Jedi. He works closely with Bosk, who's the Trandoshan. He's a lizard guy, very cool. Once again, my dad's favorite character, shout out to him. But we see that a lot in the Clone Wars, so hopefully we see him in Book of Boba Fett. He's equipped with Beskar armor, a jetpack, and a rangefinder with wrist rockets, a flamethrower, and many other forms of weaponry. He is outfitted to the max. And then his ship is called Slave 1, which is a modified Fire Spray 31 class patrol and attack craft. It was passed down to him from his father, we see it in use both in Episode 2, Attack the Clones, as well as in the original trilogy, Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. And it was passed down to him, once again, by his father. It's outfitted with numerous weapons, including the iconic seismic charges, which are the ones that like the blue rings that go like, they like suck in all the sound and they go burn outwards, which you see him use against Obi-Wan over Geonosis, and then we also see them used in The Mandalorian, which was awesome. It was such a cool moment. But yeah, that's all that I have about Boba. That's the extent of my profile of him. Let me know if I forgot or missed anything. You can email me, twinsontalks@gmail.com, DM me on Instagram @twinsontalks, or you can comment on YouTube, Twin Sun Talks podcast. But that's all that I have, but this wouldn't be a proper episode if I didn't leave y'all with a little bit more. Staying on theme for Boba, Boba Fett was originally going to be a special kind of stormtrooper super commando. He was going to have all white armor, and I mean, honestly, it looks pretty freaking sleek. So the Mandalorian super commandos seen in Rebels are kind of based off of that. But he was also going to be the main villain in Return of the Jedi, with plans for a follow-up trilogy after that. And so the follow-up trilogy, like the Emperor, was going to be more of the main villain there. So essentially we were going to get the sequel trilogy back when Star Wars was actually being made, but then he ended up going with the prequel trilogy instead. So yeah, that's all that I have for today's episode. I hope that y'all enjoyed it. Once again, stay tuned this Friday for my very first edition of The Ability to Speak Does Not Make You Intelligent with John Grimes and Hamza Al-Asadi. It's going to be a great time. I hope that y'all listen and enjoy it. But yeah, that's all that I have. You taking your first steps into a larger world. May the Force be with you, and I will see y'all in the next episode. Bye, friends.